Hello and welcome to another episode of Multifamily Collective Conversations. I'm your host, Mike Brewer, and I am joined today by a very special guest, Josh Swing, team captain, also known as account executive at Wildsparq. Josh, welcome to the show.
Mike, man, I am so incredibly excited to be here. I've been following along with you on your journey as you've started having some of these multifamily collective conversations, and it was just time. I had to reach out to you. I was like, Mike, what do I got to do? I got to get on the podcast somehow. And you were so gracious enough to allow me to come on as a guest. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Really excited to be here, man.
Well, Josh, likewise. I think we were introduced 4 years ago, plus minus. I might be a little bit off on that time frame, but I know we were introduced to each other over making spaghetti noodles in a authentic Italian restaurant here in Atlanta as part of a team building exercise. But Josh, before we get into any part of that, I want to make sure that you introduce yourself to our audience. We're both on a vlog on YouTube and also on a podcast that we put out on all the podcast channels. But Josh, if you could introduce yourself and talk about Wildsparq a little bit, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I'll start personal and then I'll get professional with the audience. Mike, I did get the chance to meet you, I guess 4-ish years ago. I remember, man, you were cranking out some homemade pasta noodles like you could do it in your sleep. I was impressed by your your unique pasta making skill set. And to give more context around that situation, so how I got introduced to Mike was through Wildsparq, my day job over here. And we get to work with Radco now and have been for the past 4 years in helping develop leaders and allow people to thrive and be the best version of themselves. I'll talk more about that here in a second. Rewind, who Josh Swing is. So I live in Birmingham, Alabama, and I've got a wife and 3 kids now. We're actually just talking before we hit record about some of the challenges of the early years. I've got 3 under the age of 5. So you can imagine life gets pretty chaotic at times. So right now we're rolling with the punches, enjoying the moments, trying to maximize this time that we have, this brief period of time where they're really little, and knowing that we'll eventually launch them out one day and we'll wish we had these moments back. I don't know how that's going to happen yet, but we'll figure it out. And so personal wise, I love the game of basketball. It's a big part of my passions and hobbies. I played through college, had the opportunity to play at a collegiate level. And now what that looks like, I'm a has-been. So I might pop up in a men's league somewhere. And then I love getting to pour back into the next generation of players. So I'll try to coach kids and things like that every now and then. I've got kids of my own now that have started to taking a liking to it. I've told my wife to hold me accountable. Don't let me pressure them into basketball. So I think I've done a good job of that so far. And then professionally, here at Wildsparq is where I work. And I've been here now for almost 6 years, which is crazy to say. And what we get to do here at Wildsparq, what our vision is as an organization, is helping other organizations that are very purpose-driven. And what I mean by that is, sure, you may be in multifamily, but at the heart of your organization is investing and caring for people. And that's what drives you forward as a business. And we love partnering with organizations like that to get a system in place to make sure that your leaders are thriving and that you're doing that to the highest level. And the rate at which we've seen that propel forward the multifamily side of things, or the restaurant side of things and restaurant companies that we work with, or the construction side of things and construction companies that we work with, is just astronomical. And so it's been really fun. It's been a really fun ride here at Wildsparq. Mike mentioned I'm lovingly referred to as the team captain here internally. And so I'm our internal culture guy a lot of the times. Really what that means is I'm a really good hype man. That's all it means, is I love getting other people really excited and galvanizing the team, rallying them, and helping us internally make sure that we're growing in the same ways that we would expect our organizations that we partner with to grow. So that's Josh Swing in a nutshell. Mike, is as good as I can sum it up. A lot of other weird things about Josh that I won't go into. We'll leave it at that.
We'll save that for episode number 2.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you introducing yourself and the company to our audience. I will just echo Wildsparq, or I guess I would add that Wildsparq has been a tremendous add to Radco. We obviously are a customer, but I feel like it's more than just a customer. We're in partnership, and really under the premise that we are building the future leaders in our organization. And really our job as leaders, at least the way I see my role in our organization, is to be in service of that future generation that will lead our organization to even higher heights. And we utilize Wildsparq to do that. It is a tremendous platform, and I we've turned it into a almost a borderline unhealthy competitive thing in our organization. I emailed Josh like, I don't know, let's say it was 30 days ago, and I'm like, what time do you release the next lesson? Because it's become so competitive that I need to be the first one to complete the lesson, because we can unpack that later, but there's a scoring system. So anyway, long story short, it's a fantastic platform. And I would endorse it all day long from the top of the rooftop. So,
Hmm.
and I'm excited to have you on the show to talk about it.
That means a lot, Mike. I really appreciate you sharing such kind, encouraging words. And man, I'll highlight you for a second. I don't know if a lot of your guests have done this, but you all at Radco have just done such an incredible job with intentionally building culture. And a lot of that has fallen on your shoulders, Mike, but you also have an incredible team around you. So I'll
Oh,
shout out some people like Janet and Tierra and some of the rest of the team that is just as passionate about building the next generation of leaders. And so I'm even excited to come over because you all do an entire internal conference called Align that's around specifically, I know there's other elements involved, but developing people is really the
that's
main
right.
focus of the conference. And so I won't say the old phrase, you put your money where your mouth is, but you put your time where your mouth is. You all say that leadership's
Yeah.
really important, but the time that you actually spend intentionally focusing on it aligns with that, which is a really big part of what we'll talk about today.
Yeah, that's right. So let's get right to that. And thank you for those kind words. And I will definitely pass on the message to Gina and Tiara. They are huge proponents of culture and leadership development. So yeah, exactly.
Big Janet Tierra
Uh,
fans.
well, I wanted to sort of underpin our conversation today on a blog post that was recently published on the Wildspark website. And it unpacks sort of 7 areas of leadership, and you led each one of the areas with some, let's call them startling statistics. And what I'd love to do is just have you, from your position, from your perspective, sort of unpack some of these things. The first sort of bolded point in the article is leadership development increases profitability. So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. I think the common misconception that we see, Mike, is you can have an incredibly profitable company or you can have an incredible culture, but you can't have both. And I would say that statement that I just said is completely false. I not only think that you can have both together, but I think if you want sustained profitability and success as an organization, you have to have a great culture. You may have some short term success if you focus specifically on profitability, but played out over time, it's not going to look pretty. And so that's what really the whole article is based on, is really making a case that culture isn't squishy. Leadership development isn't squishy. I think some people steer clear of it also because it's so hard to define and measure. It is really tangible when you look at some of the details of it. And so I know we'll get into this with some of the different points that we make. We actually had, I believe it was 7 total statistics,
That's
pretty
right.
shocking statistics in the article. Any specific one, Mike, that you wanted to start with?
Yeah, maybe start with the first one. The first
Okay.
one says lack of leadership capability costs U.S. corporations up to 550 billion.
With a B.
It's a
Insane.
big B.
I don't know if your listeners, Mike, are anything like me when I see a statistic, but I go into questioning mode. Like, where did they get the data from? What is it? How accurate is $550 billion that it's costing US corporations? And certainly there's some wiggle room in that, and there's a lot of different types of organizations on the spectrum. But we can all agree on. I think what we can unanimously agree on is people are losing significant amounts of money because of lack of an intentional leadership development strategy. And how that
Yeah.
typically plays out for most organizations who aren't investing in leadership development, number one, it's poor decision making ability. You don't have owners within the organization who are taking responsibility and making strategic decisions that are helping move the business forward because they're in cruise control because they aren't being invested in. You typically have higher turnover, would be
Mhm.
number two that that I would highlight. Where we'll talk about this more in one of the other statistics that comes up, but you're having to replace people very frequently, and that is costing you money because of the time it takes to recruit folks, onboard folks, and teach them with that skill set. The last thing that I would say is just a lack of adaptability and innovation. I mean, without a growth mindset, which leadership helps form, people get stuck in their ways. And you look at, I mean, any of the age old case studies on Blockbuster or whoever it is, Kodak, or any of these organizations that have fallen overnight, it's typically because they got stuck in their ways and they refuse to continue to adapt and to innovate. And leadership plays a role in all three of those things. And unfortunately, the dots don't always get connected to those items and the cost of it within some of the organizations across the country. And I think leadership could fix a lot of that and save a lot of organizations a lot of money. I don't know about $550 billion, but they could save them a lot of money.
Well, I'm thinking if you if you even put a 25% dent in that, it's still a big number that starts with a B. So we can
Yeah. Yeah.
we can make an impact for certain. So let's move on to the second statistic cited in the article is only 12% of people who leave their jobs cite money as the reason. Ooh, that's a big statement.
Yeah. I think that the perception may be that people are just hunting for the next highest dollar sign in their
Mhm.
career. And while I'm not naive enough to know that money plays a significant role in people's decision to work for or leave an organization, what I also know is it's not the only reason. And that's what that statistic is highlighting. Only 12% of people would say that the only reason they left an organization was because of their compensation.
Mhm.
I think, should you pay people a fair salary and wage? Absolutely. That doesn't mean don't pay people
Yeah, that's
don't
right.
pay people fairly. That's not what we're saying in that statistic. But if all that we're focused on is how competitive we are in our compensation strategy, I believe people are still going to leave at a rapid rate. And we'll get into a statistic later that tells about the amount of people who would say not having a leadership development strategy is a big reason, or not feeling like they're growing in their role is a big reason why they left. But certainly, money is important, but it's not the only thing. And it's easy to blame it on the money sometimes, and it's just not. It's not all that.
I believe that to be true. And would you agree the I've heard this statement made, and I apologize if I butcher it, but it's something along the lines of people leave people or leaders more so than they leave organizations. Is that I'm butchering the quote exactly, but
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we've seen it play out here at Wildsparq with almost everybody that has made sacrifices at some level because of the relationships that they have within our organization. And I'm sure you've seen the same thing hold true there at Radco, Mike, where I think relationships are what keep people around. It's
yeah.
do they feel valued? Do they feel like they're growing? Do they feel appreciated when they show up to work every day? Those some of those key elements, it prevents them from looking on the other side of the fence. You hear that the grass is greener approach. Oh, that company looks like they got a lot of good stuff going on. I wonder what it would be like to work over there. Well, if you're invested in the relationships and you feel a lot of value from the relationships in your own yard, you're watering where your feet are, your grass is going to be really, really green. And you're going to be looking at how green your grass is and not how green the grass is on the other side of the fence. So
Yeah.
that's how I would say that it plays out from what I've seen happen.
Yeah. I agree with that. Let's move on to number 3. The stat here is 53% of Americans are currently unhappy at work.
And this one might kind of like knocked me on my tail when I read it. I was like, geez, it's a majority of people. That means that a majority of people are unhappy in their work. And my immediate reaction was, I'm shocked that it's a majority of people. And then my second reaction was like sadness, a
Yeah.
deep feeling of empathy for a lot of people. I don't know if you've heard Mike the 80,000 hours concept, but the the general idea of it is you will spend a vast majority of your life at work. It's just the way that life flows. You spend the most amount of your time at work, and we would roughly estimate about 80,000 hours over the span of your life. It may be even more with the hustle culture that we're in and how much people cram in the busyness, lack of blurred lines with some of the work from home stuff. Like people are, reportedly working longer hours because there's no clear cutoff if you're not in an office. But incredibly sad that where you would spend a majority of your time over the span of your life is making you unhappy. And I think the root cause of this is a lack of appreciation, a lack of connectedness. Those are just things that everybody craves as human beings. Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A, had a saying, and he said, how do you know whether or not somebody needs to be appreciated? And the answer would be if they're breathing. Like if they're breathing, they need appreciation. Every human being craves that. And so if people
Yeah.
aren't getting it, they're going to quickly become unhappy and feel really disconnected. So I feel like as leaders, Mike, it's a responsibility. It's not like you know, oh, I want my people to feel happy. I think as leaders, as people who have been entrusted with others, it is our responsibility to invest in people in a way that makes them feel like they belong, that makes them feel like they're happy and allows them to unlock a fulfilled life. That's my nightmare that keeps me up at night, is that, anybody that interacted with me or with my team would get to the end of their life and go, you know what? I don't feel like anything that I did made a difference in the world.
Yeah.
So I got to unlock purpose for people.
I so agree with that. I oftentimes sort of describe my take on that to our team in the way of a rocking chair. So let's say you're at the end of your life, you're sitting in a rocking chair on a porch, you're looking out over the horizon and you're reflecting back on your life. In that reflection should be this time of joy. Certainly, heart effort. People, you're sort of designed to toil, right? To do work. Certainly want to do a good job at that, and that sometimes requires hard work. But you want to have some reflection that incorporates a lot of joy and happiness and memories that you can take. Sounds morbid, but take to the grave with yourself, right?
Yeah,
It's important. It's really, really important.
it is. It is. It's a little morbid to phrase it like that, certainly, Mike, but I think also critically important to think about just to maximize the
Yeah.
time that we do have. I love the rocking chair on the front porch illustration. I've also heard, to put like a more positive spin on it, like fast forward to your 80th birthday party, and you've got all of your closest colleagues and friends around, like they're giving toast. What do you want their toast to sound like?
I
As you're
like
getting to
that.
hear it towards the final lap of your time here on earth. So yeah, I'm with
I'm
you, man.
borrowing your illustration because it's much more positive. Thank you for sharing that. I love it.
Nobody
Love
dies. Nobody dies in my illustration.
it. I'm going right for death. I love it. Let's move on to the fourth statistic cited in the article. 93% of managers say that they need training on how to coach their team members or employees is the word here.
Yeah. And the follow up statistic to that, I think, is only 50% say that they receive training at all. So 93% would say, I need it. 50% would say, I get some level of training, whatever level of training that is. I'll paint a scenario for you, Mike, and you can tell me if this resonates. So let's just say you've got Kim, and Kim was an incredibly hard worker, great individual contributor, hit her goals month after month. And there is a supervisor position that comes available in Kim's department. And Kim naturally is one of the first choices. She's been crushing it. She's doing a great job. She's showing great determination and work ethic and productivity. And so Kim gets to step into the role without having a ton of leadership experience. And 3 months down the road, Kim goes, man, this is really hard. My team isn't performing well. And what was once really easy, Kim getting to be a phenomenal player, an individual contributor, now she's coaching and realizing that this is a whole different ball game and something that is incredibly difficult. Well, what happens is there's frustration, right? There's frustration on both sides. There's frustration on the organization who selected Kim to be in this position because they thought, oh, Kim's going to be able to do this really well. And there's frustration on Kim's part because Kim goes, man, I thought I was really good. I got a lot of my value from work. And now I'm not feeling like I'm as valuable to my organization because I'm not doing as good of a job. Well, we've seen that scenario play out time and time again in other organizations because there is a lack of support system in place for people like Kim. That's really what the statistic illuminates. And we have a conviction here at Wildsparq. And I say conviction very intentionally because it's something that we're ruthlessly committed to when you look at our mission and vision as an organization is we believe that every person deserves a great leader in their life. Every person that goes to work every day deserves to have a great leader in their life that's pouring into them. But on the flip side of that, every manager deserves the opportunity to be equipped as a leader. And a lot of organizations would agree with that first statement. Yes, every person deserves a great leader. We want all of our leaders to be great. Very few probably have thought about the second side of that equation where every manager deserves to be equipped as a leader. They expect people to already be equipped based on their track record or based on their results because it's all that your mind is focused on. So that's why Wildsparq exists in the first place. That's why there's a system in place to take high performers and high potentials and say, hey, we're not only going to put you in this new position and give you more responsibility and opportunities to more positively influence, but we're going to make sure that you're supported in this. We have a clear timeline for you, a cadence for you of how you are going to grow as a manager in this role so that you can be great at handling conflict, so that you can be great at giving feedback, so that you can be great at delegating and empowering the next generation of leaders and pouring into your team in a way that helps them go on to be leaders one day. And so I just don't even get me started on this, Mike, because I get way too fired up to talk about this statistic specifically. But I don't know. Have you heard that scenario? Have you seen that scenario play out? Have you heard that from some of your peers and your executive circles that you're a part of?
Yeah, or you probably tell by the smile on my face. Yes, it is interesting in our industry at large. It plays out, at least in my head, it plays out primarily in the sort of assistant manager to manager or maintenance technician to maintenance supervisor scenario. And you have people, to your point, who have just really demonstrated a fantastic acumen as it relates to their skill set. Usually that's a sort of a hard skill set. They know how to do work orders really well. They know how to put data into the system very well. But when you turn to the soft side of business, which I think leadership, encompasses or further encompasses, you still have to have the skill, right? But you need to take on soft skills. And if you're not equipped for that, it suddenly takes what was once a very enjoyable thing for you and turns it into incredibly hard work and sometimes disappointing and depressing work.
Yeah.
And it, to your other point, it's, if we're not equipping people for that, we've not done what we're called to do in our positions as leaders. We've more or less set people up to fail in those circumstances. So
Yeah.
definitely seen that.
I like even the specific scenario that you laid out, Mike, with even roles and titles that I'm sure a lot of listeners to this podcast and vlog could relate to, because they're a part of multifamily organizations and they have maintenance technicians that are moving into supervisor roles. And I think it's a really big action step just to think long and hard about how are we setting them up for success, and allowing them to be great at whatever that next step is in their professional journey. Really good.
Yeah, and I think just a little sidebar asterisk maybe here is I think and this is one guy's opinion, Mike's personal opinion. It's where I find that people really struggle, and I would throw myself in this bucket. Graduating through different layers of leadership over the years, is have the ability to have courageous conversations in moments of truth. And that you referred to conflict in the statement you were making, and I think we all do, right? When you work in an environment where you're with people 8 hours a day, you're in close proximity, it's very hard to have conflict. And if we don't teach people how to have healthy conflict, then that's where they really struggle in the area of leadership. Again, from this guy's opinion.
Yeah. To not go too far down the rabbit hole here on a tangent, Mike, but you usually see two different scenarios play out when there is an intentionality around things like courageous conversations. You either see one side of the spectrum where it's toxic and
That's right.
extremely personal, and it lacks a lot of trust. And then I would say you have an opposite end of the spectrum, which I would detail as terminal niceness, is a phrase that
Mm,
I use that I really liked, where you have a really positive culture where people genuinely care about each other. And then they start telling themselves the lies that I'm doing this person a favor by not having this courageous conversation with them. And in reality, what you're telling them is, I care about my own comfort and comfortability over your growth as an individual. Because if I truly cared about your growth, I would make myself uncomfortable to make sure that you knew what you needed to know to be able to continue growing. And if you asked people within some of those positive cultures, they probably tell you, oh, I care more about growth than my comfortability. But in reality, our actions don't always align with that. And a lot of times it's because we don't have the skill set, we don't have the experience of stepping into those conversations. And the hardest, and you've been in these conversations before, Mike, I have too. The hardest part of it is starting that conversation. Like, how do
yeah,
I even get it started? And how do I bring this thing up? And so if people don't have clear steps on how to do that, it's probably not going to happen, or it's probably going to happen in a negative way just because we haven't had the experience that we need. So, I mean, tools like within Wildsparq, like the deal with it guide, where you write out like a 60-second opening statement to how you would engage somebody in a tough conversation. Just that little bit of planning and preparation helps
right.
out tremendously. It takes this big and scary situation and it shrinks it down and it makes it much more small and manageable when you can plan around it and actually put some thought behind it. So, yeah, I think that is just one example, though, of one of the many leadership challenges that all of us face, because leadership is not easy.
Yeah, it's a true statement. Well, thank you for unpacking that a little bit. I enjoy these, and like you, we could probably banter back and forth forever. Let's move on to number 5.
Yeah.
So only 33% of the US workforce feels engaged at work. It goes on to say, and 79% of people who quit their jobs cite lack of appreciation as the reason.
We've talked about this a little bit, and so I won't
Mhm.
beat a dead horse, but have you heard the phrase recently, my quiet quitting? Have you heard
I
that phrase
have.
being thrown around at all? Okay. It's this concept that, even if people, so it says 79% of people who quit their job cite lack of appreciation, but I think there's a lot more people when you look at 33% of the US workforce. That's a large number that feel disengaged, that don't actually quit their job. And that's where this term quiet quitting has come up, where it's not that they're quitting, they're not putting in their 2-week notice, but what they are doing is they are doing the bare minimum to get by, to not get fired, but they're not going to exert themselves at all to get as much out of their day as they can, because they feel disengaged and unappreciated and all of these things. And man, I don't think anybody sets out for their team to feel disengaged. I don't think any executive ever in the history of business was ever like, you know what, I just really don't want an engaged team. Everybody wants engagement on their team. And they would say it's critically important. I'm sure if you said, hey, scale of 1 to 5, how important is it to have an engaged team? Any leader of an organization is going to say it's a 5, probably. Like, that is of the utmost importance to have a team that's fully engaged. And then if you asked those same leaders, well, on a scale of 1 to 5, what are you doing? What are you setting aside time for to make people feel engaged? That number would be drastically lower than the 5, the highest number that they put on the importance of it. Yeah. And so I just know that our actions need to align more with our priorities, but it's difficult, right? Because every time you block time on the calendar to do something like that, it's typically time that people aren't directly producing revenue for your organization. And so, but the bet that you're making is that it'll pay off dividends in the long run. It's like the Abraham Lincoln quote. He says, like, give me an hour to chop down a tree and I'll spend the first 45 minutes sharpening my axe. Abraham Lincoln was betting on the fact that he could do more work in that, or just as much, if not more work in that 15 minutes of having a sharp axe than he could in the full hour that you would give him to chop down a tree with a dull axe. And I would argue that making your team engaged, investing in them, showing them appreciation, affirming them, letting them grow, are all axe sharpening activities. They're going to pay off in the long run if you'll just be intentional enough to set aside some regular, consistent time for it. I think that's another issue that comes up, is it's just sporadic. Like, every now and then somebody will be like, okay, we need to do something. And then 6 months will go by or 9 months will go by and be like, oh, we haven't focused on leadership in the past 9 months. We need to do something about that. And it's just this negative cycle that occurs because there's not a regular commitment to investing. And so that's why a cadence is so critically important. Consistency is so critically important. Like, just because I'm healthy right now doesn't mean I cannot eat another salad or a vegetable for the next 6 months out of the year, because my new year will roll around and I'll realize that I am very unhealthy. The same thing that holds true for leadership. Just because we feel like we're effective right now doesn't mean we can stop feeding ourselves as leaders, because we'll quickly become ineffective and irrelevant. So yeah, you got to keep focusing on it. You got to pour into your team, and you'll see that pay off in the long term. I have no doubt about that.
I believe that to be true. I'm a big believer in doing the reps, right? And it's an incremental gain over a very long bit of time, but it's because you're disciplined about doing the reps of, be it leadership, be it weightlifting, be it eating, be it whatever it is. You do have to do the reps to maintain, because atrophy kicks in really quickly when you don't do it. So excellent. Let's do number 6. 48% of the work. 48% of the workforce will be millennials by 2020.
Yeah. I'm a millennial, so I can speak into this. You're definitely seeing generational diversity come up more and more in conversations around leadership, because there are very drastic differences in what every organization or every generation wants based on some of the world events they've been through. And knowing that, like, you look at something like millennials or Gen Zers or Xers or Boomers or whatever generation you're looking at a 20-year gap. So there's obviously
Right.
a lot of diversity even within a given generation. I think most people would say if you read some of the descriptions of the different generations that you would probably identify with two of them.
Sure.
It's a more of a blended. So I think generations are helpful more as a framework, not as the end all be all. I think people are unique ultimately. They have certain drivers and things that you need to discover personally with them. But certainly it does help as you're thinking about how to engage different generations of individuals as they're entering the workplace. And what we know about millennials more than any other generation is they want to clearly understand the purpose of their work. They want to know that it's purposeful. They're
Right.
no longer motivated. Like people are no longer motivated by the corner office and the country club membership and some of the things that maybe the previous generations were motivated by. They're very drawn towards purposeful and meaningful work. So it just means going back to the money scenario that we talked about earlier, that sure, competitive compensation is going to be a motivator for some, but I think what you will find much more impactful is over communicating the why. And if you don't have a why, you need to find out what your why is first.
Yeah.
That's their first step,
Yeah.
is to boldly declare what Simon Sinek would say is your noble cause, your noble purpose in your work, so that you can clearly articulate that to your team, because it's 48% right now. And it's clearly it's going to become a majority in the next couple of years of your workforce will be millennials. And if you're still using outdated techniques for motivating and inspiring them, then you're going to see a lot of negative consequences on that. There's a Jack Welch quote actually in the blog that says, at the level of external change, the factors that are changing around us, maybe new generations, maybe it's increased revenue, maybe we're growing as an organization, which is good, but there's more employees, which is also a good thing. But if all those things surpass the level of our internal change, the amount of which we're innovating and adapting our internal strategies to meet the demands of some of those external factors, is when failure becomes imminent.
Uh,
I think Jack Welch even says disaster becomes imminent. He uses the word disaster, um, because you implode at that point when the external pressures get too much for the internal integrity and character of the organization. So yeah, I think it's critically important to take a hard look at especially what some of the younger generations are asking and looking for in their work, so that we can continue to evolve as organizations. And how do we, one, attract those very talented individuals and then also retain them for the long term.
yeah, that's right. It as you were speaking there, it was coming to mind that the I think there are 5 generations in the workplace today. If you go from traditionalists to Gen Y, and but it seems to me that there is a mainstay or a through line, and that mainstay or through line is leadership, right, and leadership development, and so this one through line will never go away, and it is incumbent upon all of us, no matter what generation you are a part of, that you need to embrace the idea of leadership development, because it will be important ongoing and forever, at least in my opinion. Oh, go ahead.
Last one. We're rolling in. Last one. I'll take this one as we round out, Mike, and then I'd love to have a couple minutes here to dialogue just about some ways that we can combat a lot of these. We've talked about some of them, but I want to give some people some very clear cadences and strategies that they could use, regardless of whether or not you have something like Wildsparq that you can invest in. The last one here is 50% of people cite bad leadership as the main reason they leave their job, and we've all been there before. Probably if you've been in the professional realm long enough, you've had that person in your life, that bad example of leadership that you're like, yeah, they were the main reason. Joe was the reason I left that job. I could not handle another second of Joe micromanaging me, or
Right.
whatever it was, Joe's lack of trust in me. And so we know that leadership, John Maxwell would say everything rises and falls on leadership. I mean,
That's right.
it's nothing revolutionary there. We're not reinventing the wheel here with this conversation on leadership. So I'd love to flip the conversation here, Mike, for the last couple of minutes. I mean, I've got a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
As we look at rhythms, I think reasons, relationships, rhythms, 3 R's, are a big part of the weapons in the fight against some of these really shocking statistics. And so, reasons being communicating the whys, I think you need to be doing this all the time. I think specifically at least once a year, you need to be having it like an all hands directional meeting. You all do that through Align. Explain, I'd love for you to share like what's the impact that you've seen from that? Like, hey, once a year, we're going to very clearly communicate the direction for our team and set aside some intentional time for that.
Yeah, in full disclosure here, we did an Align conference. I think it was the year before, 2 years before COVID happened, and then we started to scale down the size of our organization. So we skipped a year. Then COVID happens, right? And so this Align conference that we have coming up in September will only be our second, where it's live and in person, and it is intentional about building leaders, future leaders in the organization. But I can tell you, predicated on the first experience that we had, the impact that it made on the organization, on the basis of the individuals that we fed into that day. We had a cause come in where we built bicycles, and so you had this sort of bigger picture about the Align conference beyond just the conference itself. That partnership was incredible, and we fed into people that way. We had the pilots from the Blue Angels come in and talk about the precision of leadership. The thing I remember from that experience was when they go in and they do an after action conversation about flying those jets at those speeds, at those kind of precise moments. They have this thing called take the stripes off, right? You walk in the door, you do after action, and you speak candidly about what you did right, what you did wrong. That under the premise of it's very dangerous to fly an airplane that fast, and the chance for collision is very high. But I took that away in terms of any initiative that we roll out in an organization. We need to have an after action meeting where we take the stripes off, right? And we're candid with one another. Now, we need to teach people how to be candid and have those courageous conversations in those moments. But the Align conferences is a big deal for us. It helps us create community. It helps create sort of fellowship in the sense that you have somebody you can call that is part of a peer group. You certainly have the senior leaders that are in the room. We brought in we had a panel of leaders that talked about rituals and routines in their lives, whether it be how you start your day, how you end your day, how you sort of show up to be a beneficial presence to others throughout the day, all these things. So there are and these are other people in Radco that designed this thing, so I take no credit for any of this, but they really design a program that just feeds people a cafeteria of things that they can take away and put into practice immediately that does have a larger impact on the organization.
You talk about things like that, Mike, and it's a mountaintop experience, right? You go you're up there and you're like, man, I am inspired. I'm ready to run through a wall for Radco over the next years. Yeah. And I would say it sets the pace and it sets the tone. And so that's critically important to have moments like that within your organization. I would say what comes next would be quarterly. I would say something that we do here is like a VMV offsite, vision, mission, values offsites quarterly. Mm-hmm. And so again, we're talking about rhythms here, rhythms to make sure that, right, the sporadic nature of leadership development doesn't creep in, or 9 months don't go by and we forget everything about what we learned on that mountain peak experience. You got to be able to sustain it to a level. Some of the elements that exist in our VMV, and I'd love to hear anything you have to add to this, of just anything that happens quarterly there within Radco, is we do a values shout out. So we have very clear core values, and everybody knows them here, and we'll come together as an entire team in the same room, and we will spend over an hour just saying, how have you seen somebody else in our company living out one of these core values? And you just pass the mic, and everybody just takes turns, and you just see faces light up when they get affirmed for being relational over transactional, or when they get affirmed for 360-degree leadership development as they're leading their peers or leading up to their supervisor, or whatever it is, exponential impact. They learn something from somebody, now they're taking it and teaching the next person some of these core values that exist for us. And it's just a great reminder every 3 months of the culture that we're creating internally, and how that is equally as important as the amount of clients that we're serving and how many people are continuing to use Wildsparq and all those other factors that we also want to do. But if you don't do those things, right, like we talked about earlier, people get disengaged, they stop feeling connected, and culture very quickly creeps away. And so I'd love to hear from your perspective, though. What does quarterly mean for you all there at Radco?
Yeah, so we're built on the scaling up architecture. So Vern Harnish's work, and so we have the annual, we have quarters, we have monthly, we have weekly, we have one-to-ones. Everyone in our organization has a one-to-one, and then everybody in our organization has participates in a daily huddle. All of those things are designed to do exactly what you're talking about, really imbuing and embedding in people's minds the core values that drive our organization. And so to your point about shout outs, every one of those meetings starts with what's up. And the what's up is really designed to share a personal and or a professional highlight. And that could be shouting out someone or talking about something that happened in your personal life or professional life that you feel great about. And it's amazing to me how many times in that what's up section of our meeting cadence that you hear people talk about other people in the organization that have done something special. They're not really highlighting themselves so much as they are the others in our organization. Is pretty cool.
Man. And especially as one of the executive leaders of an organization, I mean, I'm imagining just sitting back and watching that unfold is probably one of the most fulfilling things that you can do as you're leading all the people there. I mean, we're running out of time here, but you already started going into like the weekly one-on-ones that are happening, drilling it all the way down. But I would say that's important. We have to back into, what do we want to do yearly? What do we want to do quarterly? What do we want to do monthly? What do we want to do weekly? I know a big part of your monthly is Wildsparq team meetings that are happening there.
That's right.
And a lot of those align with your core values, right? We're going to pick one core value. We're going to have content aligned around that we're going to specifically have an extended conversation about, of how we continue to double down on this and make sure that we're living it out and constantly improving, right? That Kaizen principle of 1% better every day.
That's right.
And then obviously the weekly stuff here. So, but Mike, this has been so much fun getting to chat with you. I'm like, dude, we could do this for 5 more hours and probably still have stuff to talk about.
There are like all these leadership authors. You mentioned John Maxwell, and I'm like thinking Tom Peters and Peter Drucker, and we can just we could probably go on and on and on. That would be awesome.
Yeah,
but I don't know that anyone would listen to a 5-hour podcast. Maybe I don't know. Maybe we could try that sometime.
Probably not. Probably not. I hope they make it. I hope they make it through our 60 minutes here. That would be a big win if somebody makes it all the way through here.
I agree. Well, let's end cap by having you tell our audience where they can learn more about Wildsparq as an organization. Certainly, if they can reach out to you directly to learn more, I'd love for you just to share that as a resource. Again, I will endorse Wildsparq from the rooftop as loud as I can possibly speak. It's just been instrumental in our organization.
Well, we have been big fans of Mike and big fans of Radco for a really long time. So the feeling is mutual. How to connect with me? I'm really active on LinkedIn personally. So if you personally want to connect, please get on there, send me a connection request. Feel free to DM me, reach out however you want to. I put out some leadership content pretty consistently through that platform. If you're looking for some cool thoughts a couple times a week on there. The best way to get in touch with Wildsparq, there's a wildsparq.com. It's Wildsparq with a Q, WILDSPARQ.com. You can check us out more there. There's actually something on there where you can request to see more of the platform and walk through a whole live demo of everything. Obviously, please do that. That would be awesome, especially if you're looking at it for your organization. But don't feel like you can't connect if you don't want to look at Wildsparq either. Relationships is one of our core values here at Wildsparq. It's also a personal core value of mine. I just love connecting and getting to learn from people and hear stories. And so if you just want to connect and chat, feel free to reach out.
I love it. Go ahead.
Mike, I'll send you a link if you want to have it that people could easily get to either of those two things that I mentioned, a link tree that I have that people could get to me pretty easily, that you can include in episode description or wherever you want to put that.
Definitely. We will absolutely do that. Josh, I really want to thank you for your time today, making an investment with us here at Multifamily Collective. Certainly all the work you do at Radco, you personally, and also as an organization. For everyone else, we will see you next time on Collective Conversations. Take care.